welcome to Aligned, Engaged, Fulfilled, where we talk about the process of finding fulfillment in your career or in your business. I'm your host, Clarence Moore, and today we're joined by Audra Talamantes, a startup consultant and founder of Unemployable Women, a community for neurodivergent women who are done trying to force themselves to fit into corporate life. After navigating the pressures of the corporate world herself, Audra now helps women reconnect with their identity, exit unfulfilling roles, and build purpose-driven businesses that reflect who they truly are, not who the system expects them to be. Through her community, interactive workshops, and consulting, Audra empowers women to redefine success on their own terms and create sustainable paths to self-employment that actually work for their brains. Hi, Audra. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So Audra and I found each other on social media and we connected because we shared similar career experiences that sort of put us on the same path on the next stage of our professional journey in our careers. And so naturally, we felt like it made sense for us to share our war stories. At the time, I had just left my job as a CMO after working for this company for 10 years in order to go full time into my consulting practice. And I was posting content, and Audra had just gone through the same thing maybe a couple of years earlier. And that became our point of connection. Is that right, Audra?
Yes, I remember seeing your videos where you were talking about improving corporate culture. And I remember relating to that so much that I just hunted you down and had to talk to you. And our first conversation was so awesome. We had such similar experiences.
And I'm glad that you connected because I feel like, we've only had one conversation really. And I feel like we just had very similar stories. So without getting into too much detail, tell us a little bit about your journey up until this point and what's led you here.
Yeah, so I had about a 13-year corporate career and I was insanely devoted. I kind of had a rough upbringing, so I didn't really have a lot of family life or personal life, and work meant everything to me. So when I left college, I went to be a teacher in around 2009-ish when there was the big recession and there were no teaching jobs. That's originally what I wanted to do. And I realized I didn't think that was going to be the path for me. So I decided to pursue being in corporate. It felt like something where I could really be challenged, really be inspired by the work and do things that were just more interesting and more my speed. So I went into corporate, and after 13 years, I just started to see how much it was really wearing me down and how much the environment was very dysfunctional. And I felt like by the end that I was completely misled on what the environment was really like. And I really started to have a problem with that. So I left and started to build my own company, and I started to make videos on TikTok. And I just started talking about my experience. And I thought I was alone. I thought that people were I was just going to be speaking into a void and nobody was going to resonate with it. And I was very wrong. I received thousands and thousands of comments from people that were feeling the exact same way as I was. They were having mental health issues. They were feeling physically worn down. They feel like they were being targeted at work. All these things that were really feeling like their corporate workplace was antagonizing them. And so that really inspired me to start to look into this further and really see it as something that really needs to be addressed.
I think that that's such a beautiful process because I went through a similar, experience where I had worked through multiple different, work settings. I had worked in a corporate setting. I worked in kind of a corporate healthcare setting, and I had similar experiences that brought me to where I am of this realization that corporate culture is such a toxic problem, and especially exacerbated by the pandemic, where it kind of just put things into such a different perspective for a lot of us, where we were reassessing life, we were reassessing what we wanted out of our careers, and we had time to really think about it. And to your point, the moment that I started talking about it, the more I heard about similar experiences, and it kind of like turned on the megaphone on this shared experience that I think a lot of us are going through, and it's growing, right? Especially in this age of AI, I think that it's getting more and more prominent. So I love that, this is something that now more and more people are talking about.
Yes.
So like I said, Audra and I had really only had one conversation before. Like we, engage a little bit with each other's posts online, but in terms of really talking about our experience, we've only had one conversation. And what I really like about our dynamic is that we're really trying to solve the same problem that's rooted in toxic corporate culture, but we have completely different ways of doing it. We both decided to go into consulting, but with very different solutions. I chose to take a broader, more kind of diplomatic approach, while Audra's taking a more direct, point blank, and targeted approach, which I love. You seemingly, based on your content, despise corporate America, while I'm still hopeful that it can be fixed. So I'm actually really excited to talk to you again because we're pretty much on the same team, but on opposite ends of this. And I think that that's such a powerful dynamic because I think it goes to show that there isn't one right way to solve the same problem. So, Audra, your entire brand is built on a single powerful word, unemployable. And it's a word that most people would run from. But take us to the moment where you decided not to run from it, but rather reclaim it as a declaration of power.
I love this question because it just shows me that you get it. And I really respect the fact that you're actually willing and want to actually pursue fixing the issue from within. I think that people like you are so needed. I just
Thank
came
you.
to a conclusion where I realized I couldn't do it. And I realized the power in walking away. And I think it is through my TikTok when I was making all those videos and how I help other people too, is that if you want to create a business, a lot of times I tell people it's a discovery process. It's not necessarily that you just decide out of thin air, oh, I'm going to fight the machine,
Yeah.
rally against corporate. But when I made videos and I started seeing how much it resonated with people, at first I thought I was just complaining, and maybe in the beginning I was. But then as
Mm-hmm.
I continued to make videos, I saw how much it was validating people's experiences. And for me, that was so motivating. And I think the reason that there's so much value in doing that work is that I think it's because people can't speak up from the
Right.
inside. So since I'm willing to kind of throw away and abandon the entire corporate persona that I had for so long, I'm able to say things other people can't say. And I think that that was so important to me. That is such a big value to me. And I realized that I couldn't stop myself almost. And I almost feel like that's part of my neurodivergence as well.
Hmm.
And that's something that I started to embrace as well while I was going through this journey, is I realized how hard it was for me to fit into corporate America as a neurodivergent woman, especially. And so this is stuff that I just started to realize, where I know that I was needing to speak the truth for other people. And the more that I continue to talk through these things and realizing how many other people are on the same page, and I realized how much I was throwing away. And I
Hmm.
realized that once you speak up, you do become unemployable. And I started seeing that that's not necessarily a bad thing. And the moment that it really dawned on me is I Googled the word unemployable, and I
Hmm.
saw it said incapable of handling responsibility and all these really negative things that I realized wasn't really my definition of it. My definition of it was, why do I have to be abused to be in a workplace? And why is
Wow.
it that I have to be surrounded by dysfunctional people that the company is not addressing? And I started seeing how many people had that same shared experience. And if you can't be different in corporate and you can't speak the truth, then I realize that that makes me unemployable. And I'm not going to see that as a bad thing. I think we need to bring integrity back to the workplace, and that those are the
100%.
people that should be employable. And the fact that they're not is the problem. And that's the thing that I want to shine the light on.
Hmm. That's so powerful. Like I call it your manifesto, but it's really your
Yeah.
website and your bio. But in your manifesto, you say, and I quote, "We will not trade our integrity for a paycheck." And I think that
Mm.
that is such a powerful sentence because for so many people, that feels like such an impossible choice. And for some people, it's a choice that they're consciously making more and more, right? What does that trade off look like and feel like in the day to day of a corporate environment for a neurodivergent woman?
I think it's really difficult because some of these women are dealing with chronic illness and they need the
Hmm.
health care, or they are trying to figure out how to work again after being severely burned out. And they don't function like a normal person should by the standards of capitalism. And what we're being asked to do is sometimes inhuman for anybody. So I think that
Hmm.
they're sometimes willing to sacrifice their safety, their financial safety completely. And I see a lot of women that are actually just rage quitting and leaving and refusing to go back no matter what the consequences are, because at a
Yeah.
certain point the consequences to your health become so severe. People are getting so sick, and that's the thing that sometimes can get frustrating for me, is I don't think people realize that the damage that's being done by these 9 to 5 jobs and what it is really doing to people. It's not just, oh, I had a tough day because a report was due. These are people that are being psychologically dismantled and
Mm,
being brought down to a point where they're not even functional whatsoever. They're so burned out, especially neurodivergent people, I think. They're so burned out, they're so fried. The system does not make any room for them whatsoever, that they reach a certain point where they don't care what the consequences are. So I think it
yeah.
hasn't been easy. And I think that's also why I call it unemployable, because it's not just that I feel unemployable as a neurodivergent woman in a corporate world. I feel unemployable in any context under capitalism, because
Mm,
the demands of how we are to produce is so extreme that, especially in America, I feel we are just being worked to death in every
yeah.
avenue. There is no safe avenue for people. And that overall needs to change, like healthcare being tied to our employment and things like that. So it's a great question. I definitely think it's hard to answer, because I think that
Mhm.
there is no easy way to financial stability and a place that's consistently intent on exploiting the working class.
Yeah. And honestly, so that was something that I didn't realize in terms of the depth of the problem. I didn't really see what people were experiencing and how bad the experience was for them until I really focused on working in this space. I was fortunate enough to not, experience toxic culture to the point where I was having depression and things of that nature. But the more time that I spent really digging into the experiences of people, the more I watched people crying on social media and talking about how dehumanizing their experience is. And it really put things into such a different perspective in terms of really how big of a problem this has become.
Truly. And I think there's a multitude of factors. And I think you really nailed it when you said the pandemic, because I
Mm,
think the pandemic shifted our perspective as employees so
yeah.
significantly that we are never going to be able to go back to what it was like in our mentality as a working class before then.
What would you say is the most profound shift that happens in a person when they stop seeing themselves as unemployable in a broken system and really start seeing themselves more as a founder with a unique advantage, such as yourself?
I love your questions.
Thank you.
It is such a I think it is such a, it's not just a professional experience. It's such a
Hmm.
personal experience. And I think
Yeah.
that that also, and like you say, my manifesto against corporate, I think that that's so appropriate, because there have been
Right.
times where I've been wildly unhinged about it, because I
Yeah.
realize how much of an impact it has, not just on people professionally and financially, but on people's actual self-esteem and their feelings of having agency over their own life, or their feelings of feeling like they actually do bring value to the table. When you work
Mm,
at places that consistently beat you down and they don't want you to stand out and they want you to conform, eventually that takes a toll on your identity. And I'm realizing that a lot of these women that I'm working with are realizing how much not only do they feel crushed by the system, they don't know who they are. And they
mm,
realize that they never got a chance to know who they are. And I actually, in my community, I've had women that have quit on the spot. They have been in a meeting with us talking about the environment and talking about how you can shape your own future by being self employed, by finding your own clients so that you can be safe. And the relief that after they left their job was
mm.
dramatic. And it's almost like that's why I advocate for leaving, because of all of the power there is in walking away. And I
Yeah.
see it's such a transformation for people to realize that they have power, they have agency over their own life, and that they should be valued and they shouldn't tolerate any less than that.
So I want to kind of unpack how you got to, having that perspective because I think it's such a strong perspective that not a lot of people have gained yet. And on your TikTok, you originally had a theme of becoming Audra.
Mm-hmm.
And you told me a little bit about kind of where that came from, so I want you to tell that story. But the very notion of becoming Audra kind of suggests a personal evolution in your own journey. So how has your journey of becoming Audra influenced your approach to advising other leaders? Because you went from becoming Audra to unemployable women. So But talk about the
Yeah.
how, like that discovery process and, what was the realization points that got you to kind of making that transformation that you just talked about?
Yes, I originally called my account on TikTok Becoming Audra because I made up my mind that I was leaving corporate. I was extremely angry in the beginning, and my videos reflect that. In the beginning, I realized that I didn't know who I was. So I made a
Hmm.
decision that I was going to figure that out, and I was going to take TikTok along with me, and I was just going to try different things. And a lot of this comes from my product development background, where I know that
Hmm.
the main idea is to go to market immediately and then check and learn and iterate along the way. And not that I was even intent on building a business around this. I didn't know what
Hmm.
I was going to do. I didn't even know who I was. And so I opened my TikTok and I made all different kinds of videos trying to figure
Hmm.
out what I was interested in. And as I progressed forward, out of all the different videos I was making, the ones about corporate America just continued to just go viral. And I started realizing, okay, this isn't just something that I'm very wounded and angry about. There are people that also feel this exact same way, and they haven't even gotten a chance to leave. And so
Hmm.
I went from really feeling like I was going to express my personal journey or figure out who it is that I am after this experience in a general sense, to realizing that my journey really to become myself is that I needed to be self-employed. And I
Hmm.
started realizing that as a neurodivergent person, it really felt like the only option. And so that's the thing that I think is really interesting as well, is I see a lot of discussions online where people will say, oh, the 9 to 5 is not that bad. You know, people that just say, quit your job. I like my 9 to 5, and they'll defend it and things. And I think that that's
Yeah.
fine. I think that it's totally fine. I'm not saying self-employment is the way to go because it's the most freeing. It has its own difficulties for sure.
Yeah.
But I reached
100%.
a point where I realized that there are a lot of people that are becoming self employed because they feel like they have no other option. And
Hmm.
that's really when I made the shift, when I just started doubling down on the corporate content, because not only did I like validating other people's negative experiences, I had one woman tell me that she would watch my videos in the bathroom of her 9 to 5 to
Wow.
just keep herself sane,
Same.
to just hear, I'm not insane. This environment is bad. That's what's wrong. It's not me. And so when I started, it just continued to motivate me more and more and more. And I saw a video of a woman saying, when you stand up against the system, you become unemployable. And it
Hmm.
dawned on me that I want to be unemployable. I want to be so financially secure in a self employment path that I don't have to be victimized for a paycheck. And
Hmm.
that's kind of the evolution it took. And I think I'm always going to be becoming Audra. This is something that, you know, in my mind, I knew I was going to be somewhere like here today on a podcast as a guest, as somebody asking
Hmm.
me, you know, what was your journey in deciding to become Audra? And I finally feel like I made it. You know, it's just, it's so interesting. It's like deciding you're going to become something and
Yeah.
let that thing be somebody that has not subjected to abuse and exploitation
Hmm.
is a profound decision. And so, yeah, that's kind of been the journey.
I love that so much. Thank you for sharing. The reason why I asked is because, you brought up the concept of identity, and we both in our work talk about alignment and the importance of alignment. In my methodology, something that I teach is that, the misalignment directly ties to your identity. And we see this with people who are sitting in corporate and, just going through the depressive and the anxious filled experience of every day, not knowing that it might be due to a misalignment in their identity of who they know they are, who they want to be, and who they have to be at work. So I think that it's important that you brought up that very word. What would you say, like, how linked would you say is a founder's personal alignment, their identity, to the success of their organization? How critical is it that their identity has to be aligned with what they're doing?
I think it's the core of it, right next to nervous system regulation. I think that those
Hmm.
two things are just the most important. And I think that's a big part of alignment as well, is
Hmm.
that I think a lot of people go into business because they actually want to pursue something that aligns with who they are. And that's kind of a number
Hmm.
one motivator for them. I saw something that somebody said that the number one reason on people's deathbeds that they complain about, you know, what is my biggest regret, is not that I didn't work enough. It's that
Hmm.
I wasn't true to myself. I just learned that the
Yeah.
other day. And so I think that people, what I found is I didn't feel like I could be true to myself in corporate anymore
Yeah.
because of all of the ways that I'm not allowed to actually speak to the truth, which is why I like my TikTok so much. I don't want ever to not be able to speak the truth, especially if the truth that I'm speaking is about creating a better world. I'm not
Yeah.
just speaking about anything. I'm talking about the importance of actually doing what's right. Now, why
Mm.
can't I talk about that? So things like that are, I don't want to be prevented from being authentic, which doesn't always mean
Mm.
that I'm being nice or I'm not saying anything or I'm being quiet. I want to have a voice. I want to
Right.
stand for something. I want to do what's right. And I really feel like a lot of people feel that the only way to actually achieve that is through being a business owner or being a founder. So that's what
Mm.
I have found.
Yeah. And I think that an important thing for people to realize who might be listening to this is that it's okay for, a place that once served you to no longer be serving you, right? Like, and I think that was my realization is I love the company that I worked for 10 years, and for a long time it served my needs. For a long time it did feel aligned with with what my identity was and who I wanted to be. But it got to a point where through my growth, through the things that I was pursuing in terms of my own development, we we passed that. We were no longer aligned, and it was no longer able to keep up with what I needed. And it's not always the fault of the environment or the situation. So a lot of times it is, and that's where we see the toxicity come. But it's okay for something that once served you to no longer serve you. And then that gives you kind of this point of being able to make a choice. Something that I wanted to ask, because you talk about this a lot in your content as well, is the word masking, or this notion of masking in terms of corporate culture. Can you tell me a little bit more about, what you've come to understand in terms of masking and how that influences, identity in corporate culture, or, in working for yourself?
Yeah, so I noticed in corporate culture, it really feels like you're not really allowed to show your true, authentic feelings about things. That's one issue that I've seen in my experience. So, whether you're neurodivergent or not, if they're, for instance, even if things aren't going well, you have to, clap at the town halls. Even if you feel like, somebody is attacking you, if you speak up, you will become the problem. Those are things that are happening where you're not really allowed to be your true self. You have to pretend. And so that's kind of where I feel like everybody is masking, everybody is playing along with getting by and getting along. And then for neurodivergent people especially, where the masking comes in is I often feel like people aren't even allowed to have neutral facial expressions. You
Mm.
have to even present as kind of like an avid fan of your company. It's written in the fine print. So in the job description, you feel like you're coming there to do the technical job, which I would hope that that's actually what the ask is. And then over
Yeah.
time, you start to realize what you're actually needing to do is you're becoming an actor and a performer. And that's
Right.
the type of stuff that just absolutely drains neurodivergent people. They don't want
Mm.
to have to put on a show and smile and shake hands and look happy all the time when you're somewhere so often that sometimes you just want to get the work done. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that you're being rude or anything like that. I just don't want to have to inflate the executives' egos on a regular
Mm.
basis to actually remain in my role where I should just be delivering technical and actual value to the organization.
So then, in order to kind of move into this place where, you are self-employed, and you're pursuing your own thing, you lead corporate, it takes a lot of leadership. And the traditional leadership is often about managing others, or at least what we've, always been taught about leadership is about managing others. But for the founders that we work with, the first challenge is really about radical leadership. So what does a successful leadership style look like when it's designed to honor your own neurodivergence, boundaries, and your need for rest?
Yes, I think that a lot of the people that I see that are becoming self-employed are staying solo, so they're not actually taking on employees. And so I think that it really comes down to leading yourself well in the beginning, especially. You go from a very structured environment that tells you exactly when you need to do what you need to do and when you need to do it. You have that 9 to 5 Monday through Friday schedule, and then all of a sudden you just remove all of that and you just have a blank calendar. And I think that especially for neurodivergent people, they realize how poorly they've been managing their energy because they've been trying to fit into a system and a structure that doesn't work for them. So I can speak from my own experience. When all of a sudden I removed my entire calendar, I was exhausted, and I realized how burned out I was and how much that I was in survival mode just to fit into a place that wasn't considering my needs whatsoever. And so I started realizing how much I needed to be a leader for myself and figure out what is the right amount of work to do. When am I overdoing it? What do I want my life to look like? I can work at 1 in the morning now if I want to, and then not get started the next day until noon, for instance. And these are all things that require you to remove the programming of what you've been told is the right way to do things.
So that actually takes me back to, one of your TikTok posts where you explain the concept behind unemployable women. And I believe your tagline now is where who you are meets why you're here. Is
Mm.
that right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you talk about how you realize that, you are an unemployable woman, and you talk about it a little bit earlier. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like how realizing that alignment has shaped who you are? Because, on your website, you talk about refusing to conform and compromise your identity. You talk about choosing integrity over value, or integrity and values, not shrinking to fit toxic systems, and not apologizing for your needs, which are all things that I think we deep down inside, we all know are true, but we don't necessarily do the work to really discover what that means for ourselves and in our own context. What was there a process that you went through that where you intentionally worked on kind of finding what those things meant to you, like that maybe somebody else can apply to their own lives?
Yes, I mean, I work on it pretty much every single day. And it's really
Hmm.
just, I realized one of the things I realized is how much actually it is not as much nature, or sorry, other way around. It is not as much nurture as we think it is. I've been hearing that a
Hmm.
lot of research is coming out that actually we are biologically wired certain ways, and there are a lot of inherent traits we have that are just natural to us that we're born with. And I think that we're not really taught that. We're not really made to realize that actually that's why I always say it's a discovery process. You don't decide who you are, you discover who you are, because there are a lot of innate things about each of us that if we just took the time to tune in to ourselves and observe ourselves, we could
Yeah.
really start to understand what we're really better at doing than other people that we take for granted. We could realize what
Hmm.
we absolutely hate doing that other people find joy in doing and leave that to them to do. And so I think it's really also figuring out how to let go of your ego about things and
Hmm.
realizing that I don't have to have high value in all of these different categories. I just need to focus on the things that really are great that I do, and I let the other people around me do the things that I'm not so great at. And I think that that's what's really difficult for people too, is that in the corporate world, it's so competitive that you feel
Hmm.
like you need to be good at everything. And when you leave for self employment, people want to share resources more, I have found personally. People
Yeah.
are wanting to do this is what I'm excellent at. I would love to do this. And I don't want to step on your toes because I am confident in what I do and I do what I love. And I let the rest get solved elsewhere by other people. And I feel like there's more collaboration. So I think
Hmm.
that's kind of been my process of really discovering who you are through observation and then constantly experimenting and learning more about yourself just through the process of interacting with life and other people every day.
Hmm. I swear you and I are like the same brain. I actually just did a video on this where I talk about, in the years past, up until this point, the businesses that were successful are the ones that really understood competitive advantage, right? And in the world of business, it's something that they talk about all the time, competitive advantage, but we've shifted into a business landscape where competitive advantage isn't necessarily the most important thing. And we're shifting into this place where it's about collaborative advantage and
Hmm.
really discovering, or shifting your mentality to think about, rather than thinking, how do we compete in the marketplace? It's how do we strategically collaborate with people to kind of, rise together. So an example that I gave was Apple and Samsung in the marketplace. They're, strong competitors, they're rivals, but the truth is Samsung is a supplier for Apple and they work together. And without Samsung, Apple's iPhone would not be what it is. So they are an example of an organization or of organizations that understand collaborative advantage as much as competitive advantage. And I think that's an important perspective to have if you're going to be successful in the future realm of business.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that, and I'm saying it again, but I do really think that you have to unlearn that from corporate. So
Yeah.
back to your other question about figuring out who you want to be or what you want to do or and why, a lot of the things that you have to do is unlearn a bunch of stuff that you've
Yes.
learned. Because I think that they benefit in corporate environments from you having a competitive mindset because you're all trying to claw your way to the top and you want
Hmm.
to kick other people down and you want to be the best, that there's not a lot of the collaboration that could be there, that needs to be there. And I
Right.
think that these companies don't benefit from this. And this is the other thing too that I think about with leadership is when I think about all of these things, all of this stuff that we're recommending would make these companies more successful.
Yeah.
So it just confuses me on why they don't pursue these things. Like calling myself unemployable is sometimes like, I think corporate America could benefit from my kind of leadership and the people like
Mm-hmm.
me that are
100%.
running for their lives. But it's not the kind of leadership that they want. They
Yeah.
don't want the real definition of leadership. I say that a lot of times, and I'm going to get to my controversial bend that I like to do on my TikTok is it feels more like they're wardens. These
Hmm.
executives are acting more like they're just supposed to push down things and tell people what to do, and they don't actually embody real leadership. And until they're
Yeah.
ready for that, people like me are not going to want to be there.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, it's what I'm building my entire business around is, I absolutely agree. And I think that it's so needed to put people like you, like me, who want this kind of not even radical leadership, because it is the true definition of leadership, but in the context of the typical type of leadership that we see, it is radical leadership. It's people who want to ask the hard questions. It's people who want to do the hard work and really kind of question the status quo. And I'm hoping that, I'm able to build something and have a kind of impact because of that very difficulty of people to recognize the need for it, if that makes sense.
Yes, I definitely think you should get in there. And I definitely think that there is so much opportunity to learn and actually implement these things. And I can only hope that as time goes on, you and I are both kind of doing our own thing. Like I'm helping
Yeah.
people leave, and
Yes.
I'm hoping that the companies start to feel the pain of losing so many talented people. That's kind of the point of
Right.
the work that I'm doing is if you have true leadership skills and you do care and you have a lot of expertise and you are in a place that's not utilizing it, what other choice do you have but to leave so
Hmm.
that you can actually have a fulfilling career? I don't want to have a job where I have to just institute and execute without any thought and not be able to ask any questions. I don't want to be an order taker. I want to actually provide value and I want to make progress and I want to be invested in the company like it's my own. That's the
Hmm.
kind of attitude I bring to companies. And why is it being so rejected? Because I'm actually willing to take commitment and push your business forward in a true way. I mean, why would you not want that?
Yeah. So I'm glad that you bring that up. I want to dive a little bit further into that. A central tenet in your philosophy is to leave corporate and never look back. Right. And like I said earlier, I'm on the opposite side where I'm like, no, stay, we can fix it. But how does leaving corporate altogether fix the problem? Like what would you say are the implications, like both short term and long term, of leaving the system versus staying and fixing it?
So my theory is that you can't fix it from the inside, right? That's why I take such a hard stance.
Hmm.
Because technically, I think you are also fixing it from the outside. Technically,
Yeah.
you're just still willing to engage with the companies, and I'm not even willing to engage with them. My
Mm.
thought process is you suffocate them
Mm.
of their resources because they don't deserve to have them. If they're going
Mm.
to consistently exploit their workers, if they're not going to listen to them, if they're going to do what I'm seeing happen to all the people that I hear from and how run down and how sick they get from their work environments, if you're going to get to a point where you're so run down you can't even function, then you're going to get to a point where you're not even going to be able to leave by choice. You're going to have to
Mm.
leave because you have no other option. So that's
Yeah.
one thing to consider as well, especially for neurodivergent people. If they get to such a point of burnout, I remember being so burned out and so worn down and everything by the end of my career that I wasn't even cognitively functioning normally. That's what
Mm.
people don't understand. I couldn't even barely string sentences together by the end of it because it was just so disorienting. There's so much cognitive dissonance. There's so much gaslighting. I mean, this is like psychologically negative for
Right.
a
It's
person.
psychological warfare.
Exactly, right. So at a certain point, my thought process is you cannot fix it from the inside. Can you change the government from the inside? Yes, because they can't necessarily get rid of you. I mean, they could do even more terrible things to you, but a company can just fire you. If they are not committed at the top to actually change the organization, you have to have sponsorship at the top. I come from change management. If the
Mm.
top isn't in alignment with the ideas of actually having a positive workplace and making a difference and doing something better, then I always say they're committed to stay the same. And if they're committed to staying the same, then really you're just going to be at the mercy of the system. And if that's the case, you're really just surviving something for a paycheck. And so my thought process is the reason that this is going to work is because again, you suffocate them of their resources. If you are there providing value, no matter how badly they act, what does that do? And
Mm.
so my thought is really leave, bring your talents out elsewhere, become a competitor. Not that we're saying collaboration is better, but if necessary, become a competitor. I mean, that
Mm.
why do you think I'm trying to exit as many women as I can? Because I don't think they deserve to have them there. So, and especially when they make you feel like you can't do better anywhere else but with them and things like that. In that
Mm.
circumstance, I think you have no choice but to leave.
All right. So the solution of self-employment, which I think is the solution, right? I mean, I took the same approach. Like I left to be self-employed and pursue my own thing, and whatever the reason might be, I went that approach. So not that I
Mm-hmm.
disagree with you, but you and I both know that self-employment is hard, and you actually talk about this a lot in your videos. But the Small Business Association reports that about 4.7 to 5.5 million businesses are started each year, and only 10% actually become successful, whatever the level of success is defined as. So, what happens when people leave corporate to go to the self employment route, but eventually fail? Like, what's the next step when you reach a point where you may be lost, you're paralyzed, you don't know how to get to that next point or that turning point of finding success?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is why I say that there is no perfect answer because we have to look at why is that? Why are these companies failing and not able to make it on their own? And I think you could point back again to these large corporations that are not
Mm.
creating an environment where you can succeed without them on purpose. And so, yeah, I do feel like a lot of times when you make the change to leave or you make the choice to leave, you're fighting for your life to get out. And you may not succeed. And I've seen people that have had to turn back and go find a 9 to 5 again. And I definitely think that that shows us that we need systemic changes within our entire country so that people can actually work by themselves and actually succeed in being self-employed. And those
Mm.
are things like, I think a lot of reasons that people don't succeed is because of the access to healthcare and healthcare being tied to having an employer. And these
Mm.
employers, this is why I think they can behave so poorly. It's because we don't have other options that are easy or that are fair. The entire system is unfair. And so these are things that I still think that if you can get out, you should do your best to get out. I think that neurodivergent people are well positioned to get out. I think ADHD entrepreneurs are more often, I think, the profile of an entrepreneur because they
Mm.
kind of thrive in the chaos and the obstacle course that is self-employment. And I
Mm.
do think that things are changing because of the pandemic and because of technology. I'd be really interested to see what that looks like, but just how much it's changed to be self-employed virtually and work as a consultant, I think we are in a place we've never been before. And so I think the more of
100%.
us that
Yeah.
do it, the more that we have collaborators, the more that we have connections and creating a network. And that's why I think it's so important to be in community, because I realized that's kind of why I launched the community in general, is because I started realizing it is because we get isolated when we choose self-employment that makes it difficult to succeed. And it's because we don't have access to the answers to these things so that we can understand, how do we get healthcare? How do we actually establish ourselves? That's not common knowledge. The only
Yeah.
common knowledge we have is get a 9 to 5 and depend on the system that hurts you.
Yeah. So for the neurodivergent woman who might be listening to this podcast episode, what are the steps to getting out of corporate?
Yeah, I get this question all the time. And I think it's really hard to answer because it just depends on the person for sure. I always say, if you want to know how to get out of corporate, you need to tell me who you are. Right. And so much of that is really dissecting your previous experience, is what I would say is the first thing that I would do. I would
Mm,
look back at what has been my professional experience, especially if you want to leave corporate, and how do I convert that professional experience into a self-employment avenue? And I wonder if that might have more success because you've proven out that you can do marketing, for example. So why not do marketing, just get your own clients and find those
mm,
people that you can serve that you actually align with. And if it doesn't work out, you can always shift and move. And if you lose one client, you're not losing your entire paycheck. So that's
mm,
the first thing that I would say people do, is to translate their past experiences into an offer that would help clients that they would naturally serve from inside of a corporate role. That's the way that I say is the fastest path out. And then think about what type of work you want to be doing. So do you want to be consulting for corporate? I know some people that want nothing to do with corporate and want to
yeah.
find some other way. And so in that case, maybe coaching is a better opportunity for you, because I know that that's a big industry and there's a lot of problems with it and there's a lot of feelings about the word coach. But I think overall, that's an avenue where you can more help people go direct to consumer, so that
Mm.
you can actually work with people instead of continuing to serve the corporate environment.
So, and there's also a lot of people who may never want to start a business and will stay in corporate forever. What advice would you give them to navigate and thrive in that environment?
I would definitely say that
Or is it just run?
my main advice is run, because I think at least those are the people I serve, right?
Yeah.
And I thought for a long time about, I want to help people survive a toxic corporate environment. And I just decided that I could let other people do that
Mm,
type of work. And just like you're doing different types of work that serve a similar issue, you're
mm,
working from inside the organization and encouraging them to do different practices and to see things differently. My mindset is, if you want to run, I'm here to help you run, you know? But if I
mm.
were to give advice, I would definitely say not to settle for an environment where you see all the signs of narcissistic abuse, where
Right.
this is something that I think is very unchecked in the corporate environment and is something that is actually rewarded and promoted. These environments where there are leaders, I say with quotations, that are so money driven, they have no regard for other people, their lack of empathy is seen as an asset. If you're in an environment where that's the dominating culture, you have
Mm,
to find a new environment. And if you get into a new environment and that's a dominating culture, you have to find a new environment. And that's where I found myself: new environment, new environment, new environment, and realizing they're all so similar. They all feel like
similar.
they're the
Yeah.
same. And so that's where I made the conclusion, I need to run. It wasn't, oh, this
Mm,
one company, I don't like it. It was company after company after company after company. We're all functioning the same. And so I think that they can't settle and stay and remain in a toxic work environment, because you cannot stop yourself from facing or experiencing the consequences of a toxic environment. It will always reach out and touch you. And so
mm.
you can't change it alone, and if you continue to subject yourself to it, all you're going to do is commit to hurting yourself, basically. And so I
Yeah.
just can't condone that.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfect. All right. So one day, the people that do leave corporate America to be self-employed may become corporate bosses. And I say corporate because I think a lot of times when we talk about, corporate culture, we're really talking about business culture. And a lot of the same problems exist in different contexts, whether you've got a small business, a large corporation, the scale's different, but a lot of the problems are very much the same. And so there's a chance for people that do leave corporate today to one day be those bosses. So what would you say is like, how do they avoid repeating this cycle or perpetuating the very problems that you and I are working to solve today? How do they prevent that when one day they become the big organization?
Yes, I think it really comes down to a person's character. I think that's probably not
Mm,
the answer you expected, maybe, but I really feel that what is happening is that these companies that are really toxic are putting people in power that don't deserve to have the power. So I actually think the people that are more like you and I that can see it for what it is, understand that it should be different, and actually are motivated to make a difference and really truly care are the people
mm,
that should be in positions of leadership. They're the ones that naturally know the difference between right and wrong. They do
right.
the right thing when no one's looking. They don't want to abuse other people, and if they do act inappropriately, they'll have the feeling of regret. These are all
Mm,
things that if you don't have a good character and you're put in a position of power and you're responsible for an organization and you can just wreak havoc on them, this is
mm,
something that I wouldn't even be capable of. And so
yeah.
that's the thing create your own organization and have employees so that you can actually set the tone because there are people like you and I that would not even choose to do things like this. And don't put people in power that have no regard for other people and don't care about anybody else but themselves.
Mm,
That can't be, there has to be some moral criteria that we start to establish that has to be checked in order for somebody to be in leadership. I always make a joke that just like being a parent, not everybody's meant to be a parent, not everybody's meant to be a leader. And
yeah.
we need to flip our criteria.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Audra, there's so many more things that I want to dive into with you because I think that you've gained so much perspective in your experience, and as we mentioned, so have I, and I just want to understand more of the opposing forces that we've kind of come to understand. But we're about out of time. And there is one more question that I want to ask because I think it's important. Like, there is this one force that all businesses are kind of experiencing right now, and it's the force of AI. But you and I are working in the space of people, which I think is very important. And it's kind of a space that's being neglected. But, in my opinion, it's a space that we kind of need to double down on as much as we are on AI. So when it comes to managing people in the age of AI, what would you say is the most important thing for business leaders to understand?
That is such a complex question because I think what's really interesting about it is AI is top of my mind because it
Yeah.
is so unprecedented and it's going to create such massive shifts in business in general. And a big reason why I chose self-employment is I'd rather be navigating these changes as a self-employed person versus navigating these changes within corporate because I
Mm,
think it's so important that AI doesn't become such a massive problem where it just replaces our entire workforce. And I
mm,
definitely think that large corporations don't really have a regard for their employees in the first place. So I think it's really important for people to be really mindful about how they implement AI. And I think that there needs to be some ethical standards, of course, on how we're going to navigate this without hurting the integrity of the working class. And I think that's such a open question that I don't have a great answer to yet. I think that it's important for people like us that are self-employed and that are working with organizations and consulting in general to prioritize learning everything possible about AI because I think that we are not even going to be in the same working world in 10
right.
years.
Yeah.
And I think
Two
that the more
years.
even 2 years. So I think it's important. I don't really feel like I'm answering your question, but I feel
No,
like
it's
it's
okay.
important for us to be as knowledgeable about it as possible so that we can actually create a environment where these things coexist well, and instead of it
Yeah.
just continuing to exacerbate the problem, because that's the
Right.
issue that I see this continuing to exacerbate the issue, and that we are, and all the things that AI does for the environment. So do we always need it in certain circumstances? The thing that gives me the peace of mind is that I know that as human beings, we are wired for human connection, and no amount of AI is going to change that. And I think
Mm.
it is going to cause us to trust voices of people that we know are human. I think that's going to
Yes.
become even more and more important. But I think it's important to stay as informed as possible and to be fighting for ethical behavior when it comes to this.
I think that's a perfect way to end it. So before we go, and I definitely have to bring you back for a part two because again, I think that there's so many more nuances that we can dive into, and it's always a pleasure talking to you. But you recently launched a community. Tell us about that. What's the community about? Who's it for? And how does one join?
Yeah, so to your point about businesses failing and a lot of times people having to go back to corporate, I made the realization that a real reason that this happens is because there's such a lack of community. I realized how lonely it is. And if it wasn't for the fact that I had already had so many personal experiences, like we haven't even dived into what my personal life has been like up to this point. I mean, it's part of the reason why I'm as resilient as I am. And when I started doing self employment, I realized how isolating it is. I realized how many unknowns there are, how much of a lack of access of information that there is, and how lonely it is. And so I started thinking to myself, I think not only do neurodivergent women like me need the information to do successful self-employment, I also feel like they just need some sense of connection after you leave. It is one thing, once you lose your corporate 9 to 5, you lose everything. Everybody doesn't understand what you're doing or why you're doing it. They're bought into the corporate framework. They don't want to always see you succeed because they don't understand it. And you realize you're just running this path alone. So I opened a community and I have about 14 members now. It's only been open a few weeks, and I'm really excited about it because it's really intended to just be a place where neurodivergent women can connect as they're building their businesses. A lot of them don't want the perfect path drawn out for them. They want to be able to make choices and navigate their own business and the excitement of it. They just want to have some people with them along the way. So we meet once a week, Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Central, and we just talk about people's businesses. We bring in different guests to learn different things from. We're starting to build out the resources so people could quickly navigate becoming more of like an independent consultant. And it's growing more and more. I'm really excited about it. I mean, everybody is feeling like, oh, I finally have a place where people get me. They understand that I feel unemployable.
Mm.
They understand that it doesn't mean that I don't know what I'm doing. It means that actually I have a lot to offer. And I'm going to go ahead and go
Yeah.
do that now, finally.
Well, congratulations on launching that community, and it's exciting to hear that you're launching into such a successful community. It's such an important thing to have. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you? If they want to learn more about kind of the journey, how to apply it to their own professional journey and their own story, like what's the best way to connect with you?
Yes, the best way is my TikTok. That's where my main social media is at the moment. So that's at Becoming Audra. And that's where you can actually access and connect with the community. The link in the bio will connect you to the community. Or if you want to find out more information in general, you can go to unemployablewomen.com. And that's where I have a free consultation if anybody wants to book that so that they can meet with me and find out more about my services in general.
Perfect. Well, everybody, that was Audra Talamantes, founder of Unemployable Women. Audra, it's been such a pleasure to talk to you today and learn about your experience and your perspectives, and we appreciate your insight. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to having you again on another episode.
Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.